I'll be honest, Oregon and Washington coming to the Big Ten doesn't exactly help Penn State.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, that is right. You are Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Follow along on X, Twitter, whatever you call it. My name is Zach Sako, your host of the show. And let us know in the comments what you think about conference realignment. That is what Jason Lord and I are talking today. Special guest, the Lord is back. And Jason, it really doesn't get any bigger than this with Oregon and Washington joining the Big Ten. The rumor that there's going to be more teams coming to the conference as well. So it's no longer it hasn't been the Big Ten for a long time. It's now the Big 18. But I feel like outside of Notre Dame, Oregon and Washington were really the only schools they could have gotten. And I know what everybody's thinking. Well, what about Kansas? What about Kansas State? What about Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, Washington State? I know Kansas State seem pretty solidified in the Big 12. So let's focus on the Pac-12 for a second. Why doesn't the Big Ten just go and get these other schools? And I'll tell you why. Because these schools do not help the Big Ten. More importantly, this is a Penn State show, Jason. They don't help Penn State. When this contract was negotiated with Fox, NBC, and CBS, these schools are getting $100 million a year. That is a home run for Pat Kraft and any athletic director in the Big Ten. When you add more teams to the Big Ten, you get smaller pieces of the pie. So that means that Penn State, instead of getting $100 million to maintain all 31 varsity sports, get the best for football, men's basketball, wrestling, the premier sports that this school has to offer, right? I'm not trying to discount anybody else, but come on, when we think about Penn State, it's about football, wrestling, and men's basketball. Yes, there's men's hockey. All the other teams are really good, but that's besides the point. Pat Kraft has a job to do, and when you add more schools into the mix, that's what happens. So for Penn State, it's cool, but I don't know how productive it is, if I'm being honest. I don't know that adding more schools outside of maybe Notre Dame are really all that productive for Penn State in terms of financial benefit.
Just talking about for Penn State and not the Big Ten.
Yeah,
I agree with you. I think when you look at really what is going forward now, I thought they added two teams maybe a little too quickly. And the expansion, I think, is fine. I have no problem. I think ultimately you probably get to 20 teams at some point.
Yeah.
But I thought, to me, keeping USC and UCLA at first, just going that first year through 2024 to see how it goes with the two of them in there, and then expanding, I think would have been the ideal solution. But how it affects Penn State, I think from a football perspective, I don't think it's going to affect it too much. They're going to have to redraw the boundaries a little bit when it comes to the 2024-2025 football schedule now a little bit. Yeah. So it was kind of moot now to what you saw previously with how they announced it. But you're still going to have those protected opponents. You're still going to have a lot of the other things you had on that schedule. So from football, I don't know if it affects it too much. I think, we'll talk about it, obviously, as we get into Washington and Oregon, how it affects the Big Ten from a TV and scheduling standpoint. But how it affects Penn State football-wise, you talked about the revenue. I think that's a good point. You're going 1/16th prior to Washington and Oregon joining. Now you're at 1/17th because they're only getting half for the first 2024, 2025. So that's going to help a little bit. But, yeah, we'll get into it later, as you said. But we'll talk more about the financial perspective of it and who really could get into it and how it's going to affect the Big Ten. You're absolutely right, though. And these teams are going to look at how it affects their piece of the pie. There's no doubt about it. And Washington and Oregon, I think, are good additions. But the question becomes, and it's you make up the point with Notre Dame. We'll talk about it in a little bit here. How much does anybody not named Notre Dame move the needle? I think it is going to be the biggest question for me going forward when it comes to the Big Ten. I think where it affects Penn State the most, where it affects even Ohio State, Rutgers, and every other school is the travel for basketball and women's basketball.
That's
more so than anything. I think when you look now at it, you very easily could have probably put USC, UCLA consecutively.
Yeah.
That way you knock the travel completely out of the way. You play them 2 games on the road. That's it. You bring them here 2 games to Happy Valley. That's it. Now you're going on the West Coast 4 times. And when are you going to play these games? Are they going to be on weeknights? How's the travel going to work? And how does it affect it academically? Now, granted, again, that doesn't affect the revenue in any way. And look, the TV's contracts and Big Ten as a whole, they're looking at the revenue more than they're looking at anything else. Let's not completely spin it in any way. Academics are the most important, yes, but from TV perspective, they're not looking at that. But I think the question then becomes, excuse me, I think how do you schedule these basketball games? Now, I think it would have been a lot easier with USC and UCLA because you could have just knocked it out at once. Now, you can't do it all in 1 week. You're going to have to figure out how you're going to schedule it. Now, can you schedule like Oregon, Washington back-to-back in the same week? Maybe. I don't know, but it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge now, scheduling it for men's and women's basketball more so than anything. And I think you bring up wrestling, yes. Does it affect wrestling's great, but I think when you
Washington
look at
and Oregon don't exactly have wrestling programs.
Don't have
USC.
wrestling. No, no, and Stanford does.
Yeah,
they saved it. They almost didn't a couple years ago,
canceled it, right?
But I don't think, Zach, from a TV perspective, from a Big Ten revenue perspective, they're looking at any sport that isn't named men's basketball and football. They're looking at those two more than anything because that's what's going to give you the most money on a TV deal. That's what's going to share the most money from a conference perspective. So I think you're looking at the men's basketball and you're looking at football more than anything. And you knock the fraction down a little bit more. It goes from 1/16 to 1/17. That's how it affects Penn State. That's how it affects really the whole conference in terms of the money they make. Now, can you go back to those networks and say, hey, we want more money? Yeah, of course you can. And will they oblige? Probably. But it is going to affect from a revenue perspective, yes. But yeah, the concern for me, like I said, above all, is the basketball scheduling. What are you going to do now for those West Coast teams to come here and for Penn State to go there, or Nebraska, or well, not Nebraska is a little bit of a tough example. Penn State or Ohio State going there to see really how you're going to do it academically. Again, TV networks don't really care about that, whether they say it or not. I don't think they do. But from a school perspective, you are going to care about that.
It is Locked On Nittany Lions, your go-to podcast for HappyValleyInsider.com. Jason, we're going to continue to talk about what Oregon and Washington do in the short term. Again, the schedule just came out for the 2024 season not too long ago. You and I did an episode about that, the protected rivalries, Penn State being unrivaled as the one school that did not have a protected rivalry for the upcoming schedules in 24-25. And the Big Ten says they are going to have to make some changes. We'll see how they can adapt. I want to thank our sponsor of today's show, and that is LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the best when it comes to hiring candidates because these days, hiring that potential candidate can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. They get that. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that is why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. Add your job and then the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are in fact hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills so that you can quickly prioritize who you want to hire and interview in the process. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And as I said, Locked On Nittany Lions, your go-to podcast for HappyValleyInsider.com. Check them out, Penn State Rivals. Of course, there's going to be more reaction to Penn State football practice coming up. Media Day in the
already.
Yeah, really. The season's almost here, but we're going to talk. There'll be more content on Penn State Rivals and more content on Locked On Nittany Lions, your go-to podcast for HappyValleyInsider.com. Jason Lord, you can find him on X at Jason Lord 005, talking about Penn State. He's going to be helping out the local radio stations when it comes to high school football and Penn State football coverage. Jason, let's get back to it, though. Oregon and Washington now come in. I've already seen nothing set in stone, but this is why we talk about it, right? You now have 18 teams. You can't. So what's the alignment here? I feel like it's more beneficial for the Big Ten to divide up into a Big Ten West, a Big Ten Central, and a Big Ten East. Have 3 6-team divisions as opposed to 2 9-team divisions, or split down the middle at 9 teams each. And it still feels kind of awkward, right? You have USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington in the Big Ten West. That is no question. But if you go to a 9-team division, right, you're going to have what? Nebraska, Iowa. Those aren't West teams, right? But it ultimately, even if you do move to that 6-team division, you're going to lump 2 unlucky schools in that instance and become the West. I can't see basically the way that it was mapped out. Ohio State, Penn State would be in the same division. If you move to 3, right? If you move to 9, then you're going to get Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. So the Big Ten's going to make some big decisions if they're going to split that up. And then again, I think you are going to have those protected rivals are going to stay. As you mentioned, Ohio State and Michigan are going to play each other. Penn State being unrivaled, they're going to play anybody and everybody, really. So Oregon and Washington, ultimately what they do is they create a Big Ten West division. Truly, they help out USC and UCLA logistically in terms of travel. I don't know who this benefits anybody else in the Big Ten. This ultimately helps that cluster of 4 schools. Oregon and Washington really help them in terms of all the logistics. And then just as far as playing them, like Oregon's going to be fun that's how excited did people get when Ohio State and Oregon played each other last season early in the year, right? That was a lot of fun. Yeah. Penn State and Washington, people remember back to the Fiesta Bowl mostly because the Nittany Lions won. That's why it was all that's why it was all the more fun. But that was an iconic game. I really thought Utah would have been a fun addition to the Big Ten. They ultimately choose the Big 12, and I think BYU had something to do that. But this is what's going to happen. Now, as far as scheduling, Jason, I mean, the 2024 and 25 schedules were chosen. We don't know what order they're going to be in, but now Oregon and Washington have completely brand new schedules, and you got to find a way to give them 9 conference opponents.
Yeah, you got to find a way to squeeze them in. I think you got to go back to the drawing board a little bit when it comes to scheduling 2024 and 2025 now. And the protected opponents, as we said, are going to stay the same. So you're not going to have to worry about changing that.
Yeah,
that's not going to be affected a lot. I don't know if you could say this from a scheduling perspective, it's going to completely change a lot of things, but it's going to have to be altered. So you're going to have to go back to the drawing board a little bit, and we'll see, because I think you could make the argument with the flex scheduling in 2024, 2025, Penn State benefited quite a bit from it. In 2024 especially, and it had 2 big home games there, and then 2025, you had the schedule from home perspective wasn't great, but you had I thought you benefited well because it divided itself out really well. Now you got to go back to the drawing board a little bit and see what you're going to do. I do think from a scheduling perspective in terms of game times, it's going to help the Big Ten a little bit because now you have that chance. And again, you're probably going to have Rutgers, Indiana, Northwestern, teams like that in this spot. But I think now you have that opportunity to have all time slots of the day scheduled. You remember how popular Pac-12 After Dark was? Yeah. I think there's a chance you could play 10:30 Big Ten games now.
Does FS1 pick up?
Yeah. Does FS1 pick up a 10:30 game? Does somebody else pick up a 10 p.m. kickoff game where you have maybe Washington and Rutgers or Indiana and Northwestern and USC or something like that?
Right.
I think it helps there. I also think it helps from a November primetime game perspective, too, because you know how upset Penn State and Ohio State were about having to play those November primetime games this year.
Those weather games.
The weather, yeah. And I think I always felt like the weather was kind of blown out of proportion a little bit. But, that's they're the big schools. You got to cater to the big schools in the Big Ten no matter what. And Penn State, I think it does help them a little bit this year because they're on Thanksgiving break. and they're playing indoors against Michigan State, so that's going to help a little bit. But Ohio State's playing that November night game, and I think they made it really clear. Look, we made the concessions this year. It's not going to be an every year occurrence. So now you have really where you could put Washington and Oregon in that primetime slot, where you could play them at 4:30, 5 o'clock on an NBC November start, and the weather's not going to be as big of a factor. And suddenly now you have 4 West Coast teams that can factor into that, not just USC, UCLA, who I think probably would have been playing some of those November primetime games. I think they probably still will. But now you have that extra alternative a little bit to, from that scheduling perspective. So I think it hurts it in 2024, 2025, because you got to go back to the drawing board. But I think overall, when you're looking at it completely, you have that option maybe to pick up, as I said, that 10 o'clock kickoff game. And you have an option to add some other teams to the November primetime scheduling.
Yeah, and we'll see how it all unfolds here. But the Big Ten is not done, Jason.
No.
That's the thing. The Big Ten is not done. As we move into this final segment here to kind of pull it all together, Jason, you and I have talked about this. The everydayers know this. I'm confident when I make this assessment that the NCAA is finished. Not tomorrow, not a few years from now. I would probably say maybe in 5 to 10 years, we're going to start getting into a situation where college football basically becomes minor. It already is, but it's going to have more of the perception and the nature of it. I think the National College Football League is going to unfold, or it's going to develop. And basically you are going to have 3 mega conferences. It's going to be the SEC, whatever the Big 12 turns into, and then whatever the Big Ten rebrands itself.
I'll tell you what, though, Zach, are we going to have 3 or are we going to have 2? I don't know how, from a long perspective, I don't know about the Big 12 because, you lose Oklahoma, you lose Texas. I think that's going to be a lot bigger than people think.
You do recover Colorado.
You recover Colorado, but they don't move the needle as much as those other 2 teams. I said they're not going to be able to pay that $50 million. Well, they didn't have to pay an exit fee at all, obviously, out of their conference. But you're not going to move the needle as much, and not going to pay $50 million to get out of your conference as quickly as Texas and Oklahoma can, without a grant of rights, obviously. But I'll tell you what, I think you're right. We could see 3, but I think there's an outside chance maybe when it's all said and done, you see 2. You see the Big Ten, you see the SEC.
A college version of the AFC and the NFC, if you will. Okay. So whether it's 2, whether it's 3, those conferences are going to merge into one league. Okay.
Yes.
Because the goal is for these schools. The schools are tired of giving money back to the NCAA. They're saying that we can negotiate our own tournaments. We can make our own schedules. We can basically fend for ourselves. And what is the NCAA to tell them anymore? Because they wanted this 12-team playoff for a long time. They want to expand to 16. They want to go to 24. Why can't Division II do it? Division III do it? But for some reason, the Division I couldn't figure it out with the BCS era. And even before that, when journalists got to decide who the national champion was. There is so much more money to be had, folks. Imagine this, a Big Ten football tournament, a playoff before you get to the playoff. You have 4-6 teams playing this small little mini bracket. And then you have the champion go off to the playoff.
Probably not going to do that.
It could happen.
I wouldn't think, at least. I think a lot of these schools, not the NCAA, not the conference, these schools will emphasize academics first. And I think you're really stretching it if you play, 4-team tournament before you even get to the playoffs. It's been talked about. You're going to be it's been talked about. And don't rule it out by any means, but I don't know if they would do that. Not for a while, at least. I think you're comfortable with having quality opponents on a weekly basis. You're comfortable with having that Big Ten championship game and now an expanded college football playoff. I think as of right now, the conferences are going to be comfortable having that. I think at least for the near future. Could that happen down the road? Sure, it could. I don't think there's any doubt, especially if you expand more, which they probably will. But I think the schools, an emphasis on just the schools, not the conference, not the NCAA especially, I think academics are very much emphasized, and you don't want to burn these players out. You don't want them playing a 19-game schedule by any means.
That was my first thought. But when you think about a Big Ten semifinal where you have the 4 teams and then the winners move on to the championship, and then if you win that championship, then you get home field advantage in your college football playoff, or it really helps your seeding to get into the top 4, whatever which way. There's so many things that can unfold because of this. But the question is, Jason, really, what teams expand the Big Ten to go to 18 and which ones actually really benefit? Because Oregon State, Washington State, the rest of them that are still the Pac-4 at this point in time, they are not coming to the Big Ten. They are left behind. Basically, I think they're either going to merge with the Big 12 or they're going to have to become the premier teams. Cal, Stanford, Oregon State, Washington State. Those 4 are going to have to become the premier schools with the Mountain West Conference. That really feels like the only solution. The ACC, now here's where it gets interesting, because I think the ACC is going to see the same fate as the Pac-12. The ACC is going to start seeing, maybe, because there were talks that it wasn't even going to be Oregon and Washington, that it was going to be Florida State and Clemson coming to the Big Ten, that they were going to be some of the next schools. North Carolina and Virginia were going to be coming to the Big Ten. Those schools are all in the ACC, and I could see those next 4 coming to the Big Ten. I feel like Notre Dame, I feel like the natural place for them is the Big Ten. I really don't know what the holdup is, but they need a partner. Nobody is going to come in individually. Everybody basically needs that protected, even though it's not actually this for fun, like it's not branded this way, a protected rival. You basically need a partner school. You're not going to have 19 schools in a conference. No. You're not going to have an odd number of schools. Notre Dame is going to come in with somebody like, I thought, a Stanford would be an appropriate partner for them to join the Big Ten. But ultimately, it depends. But Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, Virginia, since North Carolina, South Carolina, they're in different conferences. Or does North Carolina do that, go to the SEC? But since those schools have always been rumored to the Big Ten, the Big Ten is going to expand to 24 schools, I think, when all's said and done, maybe even more.
Maybe. I think you might be right. I think they may expand that far. I think they definitely want to at least get to 20 at some point soon here. But who would be the school? You named it. I think everybody and anybody knows the impact, as arrogant as they can be and as demanding as they can be.
Virginia.
There is no question. Oh, yeah, Virginia. There is no question Notre Dame is the school that everybody wants. They have the massive power that they have above anybody, the ability to bring in an extreme amount of revenue. There is no doubt. If you can get Notre Dame at all costs, you bring them in. There's no question. Not only from a competition perspective, I think they increased the level of competition in men's basketball and football. They also moved that needle in a big way.
Hi, Micah Shrewsbury.
Yeah, exactly. From a revenue standpoint, Notre Dame is the school you want to bring in. Now, who would Notre Dame bring in with them if they came?
I don't know.
I could make the argument you could bring anybody in with Notre Dame and it'd be fine, because the schools are going to be okay with losing that a little bit amount of money to the other school, because Notre Dame's going to balance it out just fine. Who would they bring in? Ideally, I think you named it. I think Stanford would be the team that Notre Dame could bring in. If you're just bringing Stanford and Cal in, what do they do for the Big Ten? What do they do from a money perspective? Why should Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, USC, why should they share that money? Why should that 116 go to 120th? What are they going to do to bring the revenue into the Big Ten? What are they going to do from a TV contract? How much are they going to change it? Stanford is great academically. Stanford is great consistently with a Director's Cup standing. Mm-hmm. Do they give you enough interest, football and basketball-wise, to move that revenue further? I don't know. Does Cal? I'm not sure either.
Cal definitely does not. Cal is they want to go. There's been talk that they go FCS, that they completely drop out.
Very much so. Very much so. So Notre Dame's the team I think of. You talk about the ACC schools, accreditation is going to have to be the issue with them. AAU certification. Mm-hmm. Big Ten's not going to take them, in my opinion, if they don't have that. And that's where I think they've got to work on that if you're Florida State and you're Clemson. I think you also, from a Clemson and Florida State perspective, is Clemson one of the premier programs in college football right now? Yes. But I think, to me, they've got to get even bigger. Clemson and Florida State both, I think, have to get to even a little bit of a higher level. Florida State especially. I think they'll be better. Their recruiting has gotten a lot better. But again, it comes down to, for me, it's the accreditation. I think the AAU certification is massive. I don't think the Big Ten's going to take you. right now, at least, until you have that in some way. But Florida State in 1993, 1994, I would have taken them in a heartbeat in the Big Ten. But now do they have the ability to be that premier school like USC, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan are? I don't know. And I think that's where the question has to be asked for the Big Ten. Are you going to expand? I think there's no doubt you're going to expand. Who are you going to bring in? Everybody's top priority, as I said, is going to have to be Notre Dame. If you can get them in some way, you get them. Notre Dame just can move the needle like nobody else, and that's just the realistic part of it. They make the most money. There's a reason they're on their own network as one school. It's the money they bring in. It's the tradition they have. It's the establishment of that program from a top to bottom, and the fan base is just absolutely driven in a big way, and that's why Notre Dame has to be the top school, the top target for anybody, for the Big Ten, for the SEC. And if you can get them, I'm not sure it matters much who that second team is that comes in with them. I think preferably you'd probably say Stanford, because I think Notre Dame, Stanford would be I think they consistently could be that protected opponent, maybe, or USC could be their protected opponent. I don't know. But Notre Dame, again, is just clearly number one above all, would be the program you want to bring in.
I'd rather see Penn State play Notre Dame every single year and not Pitt, instead of a school like Pitt. So
there's no doubt. It benefits both schools when you play Penn State and Notre Dame. Penn State and Pitt, to me, I think the argument can easily be made. Pitt needs Penn State a lot more than Penn State needs Pitt. There's no question about that. That's when you had that game in 2016. I thought it was a special atmosphere at Heinz Field. I thought it was an incredible game. It felt like the rivalry was there, absolutely. And they played each other 3 more times, and I think they called it the Keystone Classic for those 4 years, and it was great. But no, I don't think you could play that every year. I think from right now, at least, it's still a little bit one-sided. Pitt's gotten to be a lot better. They won the ACC with Kenny Pickett there, so I think they're a lot more respectable school. You have the hatred between Narduzzi and Franklin. I think that's very clear as day, but I think from a matchup perspective, from a Big Ten perspective, I don't think Pitt helps Penn State that much. I think Penn State and Notre Dame, Penn State and anybody else in terms of a premier non-conference opponent, and premier non-conference being the key word, would be a lot better than playing Pitt.
I think that should do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Nothing like dunking on Pitt before we conclude a podcast, Jason. So I appreciate what you have to say.
It's never a bad time to do that when you associate yourself in any way with Penn State. It's never bad to dunk on the Panthers in any way.
Appreciate the time as always, and can't wait to do this again, Jason.
Oh, can't wait. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me, Zach.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. Become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow along on X, Twitter as it's formerly known, at my personal account at Zach_Seiko and at Locked On Nittany for more Penn State football content.